Hey fellow foodies! I want to thank you for joining me on this culinary tour. What a year it has been! This will be my last full video for this year. And I'm making beef Wellington because I think it's one of the dishes that looks really amazing when served at special occasions. It looks very intimidating to make, but it's actually really easy. Once you've mastered making this dish, you'll want to make it again and again. Trust me. To start, we need mushrooms. I'm using a few different kinds of mushrooms to amp up the flavor. I'm using half a box of baby bella mushrooms and half a box of regular button mushrooms. I also soaked 1 cup of dried mushrooms in hot water and let that sit out for at least an hour. First, clean and wipe down the button mushrooms and baby bella. Then, slice them into smaller pieces to help the food chopper. Use a food chopper to chop them into smaller pieces. But do not overpulse. We do not want a mushroom puree. After you've chopped the mushrooms, place them in a separate bowl. With the dried mushrooms, before putting them in the chopper, make sure to drain the liquid. You can always reserve the liquid and use it for something else. The liquid has a lot of flavor. It's good for making mushroom soup or vegetable stock. Next, we also want to chop some cooked chestnuts. I bought some pre-cooked chestnuts and I'm using 3 bags. This is about 1 1/2 cups of chestnuts. Give it a pulse and then put it aside. Next, we want to start cooking our mushrooms. Use a cast iron pan to cook your mushrooms until they're dry. It helps to use a cast iron pan that there's even heat. Make sure that the most of the liquid has evaporated before transferring the mushroom into another bowl to let it cool down. I also cook the mushroom in batches so that it doesn't overcrowd the pan. Then, in the same pan, toast your chopped chestnuts as well. Cook that for about a minute. Then transfer the chestnuts in the same bowl with your mushrooms and then mix them together. The chestnuts will help absorb the liquid that is left in your mushrooms, if there is any. This is important because when we're assembling the beef Wellington, we want the mushrooms very dry. Otherwise, the puff pastry will get wet and soggy and will not puff up. Now, let's start searing our beef. The beef used for this is usually a nice piece of beef tenderloin. It is the most tender part of the beef and is pretty even in shape. That's why it's easier to wrap and great for presentation. I bought a long piece, so I cut them into shorter pieces to wrap. You don't need to buy a long piece, you can just buy a nice small piece as well. I usually make a few pieces with the long ones I bought. I'm able to make 4 pieces of beef Wellington. You can freeze the rest so you can have them ready to cook anytime. Just be sure to add an extra 15 to 20 minutes of cooking time when you take it out of the freezer. It's important to season our beef before searing. Add salt and pepper and sear your beef on all sides. Then transfer to a plate. And while it's still warm, brush on some English mustard. If you don't have English mustard, you can use Dijon or you can use whatever you have in hand. This will give the beef some nice flavor, help keep it moist, and help marinate and tenderize your beef. Brush generously on all sides and let it sit while we prepare the rest of our ingredients. Next, we want to place a saran or cling wrap long enough to be able to roll our beef, about the length of a regular sheet pan. We then take our thinly sliced prosciutto and then start layering them onto our wrap. Overlap them a little bit so that they don't fall apart when rolling. I use about 12 pieces for about 2 pounds of beef. Our next step is spread a good layer of our mushroom and chestnut mixture onto our lined prosciutto. Do not make it too thick or too thin. I spreaded about 1/8 inch layer of the mushroom mix. Then place your beef on one end and then start rolling your beef. Gently roll them and then tuck them in the ends. Then keep rolling until it's nice and tight. Then seal it with a cling wrap and then twisting the ends. You can use another cling wrap and roll it on the opposite way just to make sure you properly sealed before placing it in your fridge. Then our next step is to get our puff pastry and then roll them out. I let my puff pastry thaw in the fridge a day before using it. Do not let it sit on the counter or room temperature. You want to keep the butter and the puff pastry cold, otherwise it will not puff up. And then once ready, roll your puff pastry lengthwise. Then add in your wrapped beef in the middle and then measure it to be able to seal it. Cut the leftover puff pastry for extra decoration. Once you have wrapped your beef, you can then place your beef on the tray and then brush it with egg wash. I'm using my leftover puff pastry and rolling it out, and using my handy puff pastry cutter to make this cutout design. Measure it on your rolled beef and then place it on top and then brush with more egg wash before placing it in the oven. The oven was preheated to 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Cook your beef for about 30 to 40 minutes depending on how you like your beef done. I cooked ours for about 30 minutes and it's just perfect. Nice and pink on the inside and tender and juicy. Then let it rest for about 10 to 15 minutes before cutting and serving. The rest of my beef Wellingtons are in the freezer and ready to be used anytime. I hope you give this one a try and let me know how you enjoy it. Happy holidays and wish you Happy New Year. And as always, thanks for watching!